Welcome to today's show. We got a great guest, and Bobby Holland may be joining us by car. So I wanted to talk a little bit about his editorial this month, The Trouble with Zero. And I think we'll wait for Bobby to call in if he makes the show, because I really want to get his input. The editorial in the beginning of Fire Engineering was really makes you think. And while the term and the phrase, everybody goes home, is a great goal, it almost sets us up for a negative expectation, because in the fire service and in life, not everybody goes home. My father used to say, nobody gets out alive. We're just trying to prolong the inevitable, and it's the quality of life that you have that makes it worth living. We need to take care of each other, and we need to realize that this job is dangerous, and not everybody goes home. So with that, we'll hold off on that conversation for Bobby, and I'd like to turn it over to PJ, who's going to introduce our distinguished guest today.
Thanks, Frank. Appreciate that. And welcome, Frank. Merry Christmas to you and your family. Today, for December 22nd of 2001, we're going to have a discussion about resilience and being resilient in the fire service. Our guest today is going to give his personal story, which to some of you and to me is heart-wrenching. The story, it's important to understand so we can discuss our resiliency. In our profession, our mental health takes a hit, both personally and professionally, but we must still get up and face the day every day. When you hear our guest today, Pat Kenny's story, you'll see exactly, in my opinion, of what resiliency is. This time of year is a great time of year for many of us. It's very exciting. The holidays are traditionally always very good for all of us. But must remember, it's also difficult for some who may be struggling today. So please keep that in mind today as we go forward after today's show. That's very important to be there for each other, regardless of the time of the year. And know that just on, this week, you may be celebrating from your family and all things are good, that there may be somebody that you work with or somebody that you come across that's not having a good day, and that you need to be there for them. And don't assume that, the Christmas time is good for everybody. So our guest today, Pat Kenny, has been a member of the fire service for 38 years before retiring in January of 21. He served as the fire chief of Hinsdale and Western Springs in Illinois. He's been a chief officer for 25 years and a speaker in multiple countries or multiple counties on May Day for mental health for more than a decade. He's the international best-selling author of Taking the Cape Off, How to Lead Through Mental Illness, Unimaginable Grief and Loss. He has many published articles. He's an FDIC instructor. In 2021, he was bestowed with Fire Engineering and the ISFSI George D. Post Instructor of the Year Award. Now, for any of you that attend FDIC or follow FDIC, you know what a prestigious award that is, and it's not something that's handed out lightly each and every year. So we welcomed Pat to the show today, and I was blessed to be in Portland at the North American Fire Training Directors this past fall. And, really wasn't sure what to expect. And I was sitting at this table pretty much by myself, and Pat comes up and he's engaging. He pulled me right in from the first few minutes of his speech. And before I knew it, his speech was over, his time was over, and the tears were just running down my face. He totally sucked me in. So luckily today I can turn my camera off if it gets like that, but I won't shut it off because he has what I like to say is a great story, because there's so many lessons that are built into it. But it is a very difficult story because of what this chief has been through. But what we need to remember, he's resilient. There's not too many people that take the hits and the kicks and get stomped on like he has. And he still gets up every day, and he's still making a positive impact on the fire service nationally. So I'd like to turn it over for a few minutes to Pat so we can hear his story, and then we'll get into some of the conversation of what that actually means for resiliency for us. So Chief, thank you for spending your time with us today and sharing this story with all of our listeners.
Well, PJ and Frank, it's an honor to be on here. And as we talked about before we went on the air, I give you credit, PJ. You've already sat through me, and then you invited me to come on here. I always get nervous when people introduce me. Sometimes when I go to speak and they go, you better have a handkerchief close to you. And I'm like, oh my, that is not the way to start. But so hopefully for people who are listening today, one of the goals is to give you hope about your resiliency and hope about the challenges of mental health and being successful, because there are so many people who deal with mental health challenges who have amazing careers, not only first responders, but in so many different ways. Because if you get nothing out of today other than this message, here's what's really important: is mental illness is a physical illness. It's not a character deficiency. It's not a weakness. It's not a choice. It's something that people end up, because of the chemistry in their body and in their brain, have to deal with. And if we hit it head on and we deal with it like a physical illness, we can manage it. We can keep it in pace of where it needs to be to make us successful. And I'll let you in on a little secret. There are a lot of people in the fire service who have mental health challenges, who have gone for help and then are on medication, and they are kicking butt. And you don't know it any more than you would know me taking my high blood pressure medication. It's the same thing. So we're going to kind of go down that road today. And I would ask you that the challenges we go through this is I want you to do your own self-analysis. It's not about your department. It's not about your family today specifically. It's about you. And when I think about that, right before we came on, I was thinking about Chicago lost a young firefighter yesterday, firefighter Michonne Plummer, only 30 years old. And we talk about Christmas time. That is a time where many people think the suicide rate and everything goes up. And actually, statistics show it doesn't occur during that time. And one of the reasons they theorize is because people are reaching out more during Christmas. You might send a Christmas card to one of your uncles that you don't really frankly like, but you send the Christmas card anyways. And so there's a kind of a connection that goes on. So for those of you who are suffering at this time of the year, I really echo, please reach out. The Plummer family will have an empty chair on Christmas, and there's no way to replace that. He'll be sitting there, but they won't be able to see him. And so we reach out in that time of grief, and then sometimes we let it go away and it doesn't become a priority, and that needs to stay a priority. So let me tell you a little bit about my story, because it's something that I've kept front and center for over 50 years, literally. So make it very short and sweet. So you were right, PJ. I have taught in other countries. I taught in the UK, and they told me to slow down. I talk too fast because I talk funny. There's a bunch of Brits sitting there, so it was an interesting conversation. But I grew up in an Irish Catholic family right by Chicago Midway Airport. Both my parents were from Ireland. My dad, high school education, and then actually went to London to get an engineering degree. My mom, only a second grade education. Both of them grew up on a farm 15 miles apart from each other in Ireland. Never met there. Met at a dance in Chicago and got married. Irish Catholic family. I'm an only child. That's probably one of 1% of Irish Catholic families ever. I think they were done when they had me. So growing up, only child, male, your mom always loves and dreams about you becoming a priest. And that'll be part of this journey I'm going to talk about is a spiritual connection. So I grew up in this very happy home. Unfortunately, when there's only one child to feed, and you have a mother and my grandmother who lived with us, who loved to cook, when your first name is Pat and you're fat, the early years of your life become a little bit of a challenge. And I was really wondering if that was ever going to switch. My dad was a great athlete in Ireland. There's a sport, if you Google it, called hurling. It's kind of a maniac sport, and you have to be in incredible shape to play it. And so he was very athletic. I couldn't walk and chew gum as I'm entering junior high. And I do really believe the good Lord looked down and said, I got to do something for this kid because he's a mess. And threw on the athletic gene. And I went from Fat Pat, who was last, always picked on a team, to first. And now I was going to go to high school and play football and play baseball. I was a catcher, and I was a fullback and middle linebacker, and had my whole future laid out. Even at 14, the prettiest cheerleaders going to yell when I'm coming out of the tunnel, be behind a plate, and they're going to be cheering for me. I'm going to go through high school and college, be very successful, be a professional athlete. And my dad, who was my hero, would be sitting up in the stands, always very, very proud of me. Had it all dialed in. Well, I graduated in May, and in July, when going to actually purchase a pair of new spikes for tryouts, I got hit by a car. Ended up with both of my legs shattered. And for a time there, they weren't sure that I'd ever even walk again. So literally in the span of stepping between two cars, my whole athletic dreams were gone. And I was sitting in a position where life was pretty dark. So I started high school, ironically, on Halloween. Not a good time to start. Everybody else has already been gone through freshman hazing, and you come in on crutches and you're another target. And but I was starting to get a little better. Physical therapy was was working. There wasn't any projections of athletics, but it was just, can you walk again? So now we're getting towards the end of the year, and my dad, his favorite meal was duck. Grease fire waiting to happen. Never liked it myself, but that was probably the beginnings of thinking about being a firefighter. And on that Christmas day, as we come up on that anniversary now, he didn't really touch it very much. And the next day, on the 26th, I heard him throwing up in the bathroom, and it was disturbing. So I finally knocked on the door and opened it, and I didn't know what it was at the time. I do now, but the sink was full of red blood clots. And he had a frightened look on his face. And I said, Dad, I go, are you okay? He said, you need to call the ambulance. Now, you have to understand the Irish culture, like many of the European cultures at that point, were anti-doctors. Didn't want anything to do with it at all. My dad, certainly. So the first red flag for me should have been when he said, call the ambulance. So my mom did. Chicago Fire came. They put my dad on the stretcher. My dad at this point now was nothing. Didn't look like an athlete at all. Had a beer belly, hair thinning, but he still was big and strong from the chest up. Big hands, big shoulders. And I remember as he was going out the door in the gurney, he blocked the door with his arms. And he looked at me and he had tears in his eyes. And I'd only seen my dad cry one other time, and that was when his brother died. And he said, I'll never be back here again. And of course, I'm in a panic. I go running up the stretcher. I'm like, Dad, I get it. You're scared. These guys are going to be fine. We'll take you to the hospital. We'll get you all fixed up. You're going to be good. He let go of the door and they took him away. So about 3 days later, my mom took me to the hospital. I remember walking in the hospital room and he was as yellow as could be. He was blessing himself consistently. And I could see for the first time ever in his eyes a consistent fear. And I had this little voice inside of me, and I really challenge you, whether you're at an emergency scene or you're at a family situation or you're sitting at the kitchen table at the firehouse, and that little voice, if it says something to you, you really need to listen to it, because usually it's right. And that little voice said, your dad's going to die. And 2 weeks earlier, I had had a dream. I pictured him in the casket, the suit he wore, the color of the casket, the smell of the flowers, which to this day, there are certain flowers, and if I smell them, it's a trigger. The wallpaper, the whole 9 yards. And I woke up crying. And then I went, oh my God, it's just a dream, thank God. And now this little voice was going, no dream, it's coming. And I didn't have the courage to go up to him and tell him I loved him, because I thought he was going to die. My mom kept telling me he's going to be fine. He's going to be just fine. So one tip, if you're a parent and you're running into a situation like this, that God forbid, I hope you never do, kids are way too smart. And honesty is the best policy, because 4 days later, he died on January 1st of a massive stomach hemorrhage. When they did the autopsy, they found out that he was full of cancer. Doctors said it had gone on for a long time. And when I look back, the last 6 months or so, his drinking had changed. It was a lot more than social. It was on a regular basis and heavy. And the doctor said that makes sense. He was self-medicating for the pain. So I want you to remember that self-medicating thing as we go forward in this talk. So now in the span from July 20th to January 1st, and it'll be 50 years since I put my arms around my dad this January 1st, my dreams of being an athlete and having my dad stand in the stands were crushed. I had nothing. Everything was pitch black to me. No hope. None. So the school bus that we took public transit to go to high school, went right by the cemetery. So about a week after my dad was buried, I got off that bus on a bright sunny day, but very, very cold, wind chill below zero. At this point in physical therapy, I was walking maybe a quarter of a mile. It was about a mile and a half walk to his grave. And I had my, what we called a Benny bag full of, my books, and on my shoulder, went into the cemetery. Wasn't hard to find his grave because it was the only one that wasn't covered in snow. And I sat down next to that grave, and I sat down to die. And I want you to just stop and think for a minute. My mom, I told you, second grade education. We just had a new house built, big mortgage. She'd never worked. She just lost her husband, father of her children, in a 5-day span. And now the only other person in life that she probably cared the most about was going to take his life. So when people talk about suicide, they say it's one of the most selfish things anybody could do. And many times you hear this story when some man or woman takes their life, that they say, well, I don't understand. I mean, they had a wonderful spouse. They had a great job. Their kids are so successful. I mean, why? And what you need to know about, because I can tell you sitting there debating myself and wanting to do it, was you don't think about any of that. All you see is this little tunnel, and it's pitch black. And at the end of it, there's a little light. And the only chance you have to get to that light is to go through that door. And if you go through that door, you're going to take your life, because everything else around you is suffocating you. There is no positive. You can't be talked into that that's positive. That's your perception. And it was mine. And I had a great faith. I really believed my dad was someplace else. And I knew when I got there, he would be pissed. But I needed to go because I just couldn't take that pain anymore. 14 years old. So I laid down in the snow next to him, waiting to die, figuring, okay, this is hypothermia. I'm going to get cold. I'm going to get tired. And then I'm going to go to sleep. Isn't that a bad way to go? So I laid there for a minute or so. And then all of a sudden, for the first time, I heard something. And it was a voice. And it said, you need to sit up and get out of there. And I remember being startled, thinking, oh boy, it's starting to work already. I'm starting to have hallucinations. It won't be long. I wonder what it's like to go over and die. And then I heard the voice again, except this time the voice had a very different tone, but it was a tone I was familiar with. One my dad would use when he was angry about me because I had sassed back to my mom or had a poor grade on a report card. I left my room a mess. And this time the voice said, I said, get up and get out of there. And this time I sat up, startled. And I went, oh my God, you are someplace else. So now the scramble to get into the cemetery was a scramble to get out of the cemetery. And I dragged myself out of there. I really think he helped me because there was no way. I was frozen at that point. I should have been able to get out of there. Could have died on that road in that cemetery. But I got out, no cell phone. Back then we used to pay phone. My grandmother was the only one in the family who drove. And she came and picked me up. I said, I just needed to stop and see Dad. For my entire life, the time my grandmother was buried, my mom buried, I never told them why I went to that cemetery. Because everybody told me, you're now the man of the house. You need to step up. And in the Irish culture, probably even worse than what was the American culture at that time and even now, suicide had this incredible stigma to it. And so to admit that at 14, after my dad died, I was actually thinking about taking my life would have been the biggest shame that anybody could have put on anybody. And I was not going to do that. So I never told them. Could I have used counseling? Oh my God. Could I? Could I have used just to be able to talk to somebody and tell them that I was actually thinking about doing that? Hands down. You talk about peer support, but my friends didn't know anything about that. In fact, my friends, until they read the book, had no idea that I had done that. So I went through high school, pushed myself through, tried to reinvent myself. What am I going to do? Where's my new path in life? Thought, okay, I'll be a teacher and I'll be a coach. At least I'll be near the field. Can't do anything, but at least I can coach. So I finished high school, went away to U of I for a couple of years and then transferred to Loyola. And when I made that transfer, something really stuck in my mind. And it was this feeling like, okay, there's a reason that you're alive. You should have died when that car hit you. One more step and it goes right over you. You should have died in that cemetery, but you didn't. So there must be some reason. There's a plan. Maybe part of that plan is maybe your mom was right. Maybe you should go into the priesthood. So I actually went into the seminary for the last couple of years. And when I graduated and it was time to go on for your further training, I stopped because everybody was telling me, oh, you're going to be great at this. This is it. You've got a vocation. I just wasn't sure whether I was doing that because I had a vocation or if I was doing it because everybody told me how great I would be. The thing I wanted the most about playing those sports and have my dad sit in the stands, that validation that, hey, you're great. So I thought, I'm going to take a year off and I'll see. If I've got this vocation, here I go. If I don't have this vocation, I'll find something else. My friends, meanwhile, are mortified. They're like, Pat, seriously, do you know what you're doing? And I guess it hit me the most when they said, okay, when you come back, not if, when you come back to complete your training, there's a few things you have to sign. And one of them is this paper here. And I'm looking at it and I'm reading it and I go, okay, so what is celibacy? Excuse me? For how long? And I went, no, how about if I just say grace before meals? That'll be fine. I'm going to move on and find something else to do. So teaching became my calling. And so I thought that's where I'm going to go into. So I went into teaching. At the same time, I met a young lady in that year that I was off named Eileen. Eileen was true Irish Catholic, one of 13. Okay. Only child, 13. First actual event that we went to together was at Thanksgiving. And all these people are crammed into this basement. And I go, okay, so you told me I'm going to meet your family. Where are they? Because they're over there. I go, yeah, all those people over there. Who are they? She goes, all of them. 8 brothers. You talk about going through the worst tactical exercise you've ever gone through. Try being the guy who's dating the favorite sister. So I never liked being an only child. So I was like, hey, this is great. So we get married, have 3 children, Patrick, Brendan, and Sean. I'm now teaching high school and I'm coaching baseball. I am absolutely as close to happy as I can be coaching baseball. I am as miserable as I can be teaching. It just wasn't for me. So I had a brother-in-law who was a firefighter. It's like, Pat, he goes, you'd be great in the fire service. He goes, it's right up your alley. He said, every day is different. It's the challenge of can you do it or not. It gives you that great feeling that you've saved people. He goes, kind of like a different vocation. So I don't know. I go, my legs, I'm not sure I'll make it through the physical agility, blah, blah, blah. And my wife encouraged me. And so I started taking tests and I got on the fire department. So here I am now with a new career and feeling very comfortable in that new vocation that I was going to go forward with an outstanding wife and 3 great kids, boys. I'm the last of that run of the boys. So it was like, okay, I get to carry on the lineage and I got 3 sons that are going to carry on. This is great. And life all of a sudden had gone from that incredible darkness of where I was going to take my life to this bright, sunny thing that you were going to reach for. So when you're in that darkness and you believe you can never see light again, you can. Sometimes it takes time and you got to be patient. And we all in the fire service are so action oriented. Patience is not a word in our vocabulary. It's certainly not mine, but I was there. And then all of a sudden, another challenge. When Sean was 5, he was diagnosed with clinical depression. Now, I didn't know you could have clinical depression at 5. I mean, I knew you could be upset because they grounded you, or you could be sad you didn't get a scoop of ice cream, or you could be disappointed underneath the Christmas tree. But you sure the hell couldn't have a clinical diagnosis. And Eileen, who this is the theme, was always the smartest of the 2 of us. She noticed that he was coloring in black all the time. And he wore Velcro shoes, big deal back then. And he would literally do them 50 times, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, before he went to kindergarten. If you interrupted that cycle, he would have what I called an Irish temper tantrum. I now know was a panic attack. So she took him to the pediatrician. We had a very wonderful pediatrician who said, yeah, you're right. Something's not right. She took him to see a psychologist. The psychologist said, yeah, he's got clinical depression. And we're going to treat him with medication and we're going to treat him with counseling. Now, I truly believe when you come into this service, whether you're a volunteer, combination, career person, it doesn't matter. When I talk about service, that's all of us. It's a vocation. It's not an occupation because it's not based on whether you get paid or not. You get called to it. When you get called to it, you get given a cape. And the cape allows you to do things, go places that nobody else can, nor will they go. And that's the good news. The bad news is that sometimes that cape chokes you when you feel like you can't save the day, when you can't make a difference. And certainly when it's so close to home that it's a member of your family. So here I am with a 5-year-old diagnosed with clinical depression. And the guy who wears the cape is going, no way. So I just went along with it. I didn't see any negative impact on my son. The medication didn't seem to do anything that would be negative. It made my wife happy. So I'm like, okay, this is just a phase. I'm going to ride through this. And we rode through it pretty much until junior high. Well, those of you who've had junior high kids, or if you can remember back to your junior high years, they stink. You don't like yourself very much. And all of these chemicals, remember I talked about mental illness as a chemical. All these chemicals are going on inside you. Hormones are just exploding. Well, if you have a mental health challenge or challenges, when that period hits, it's like literally putting gasoline on a fire. It just causes those explosions throughout your body and in your brain to get worse. And that's exactly what it did for Sean. He got much worse in junior high, and all of a sudden he was diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder, which I thought was washing your hands too many times, throwing the light switch too much. I had no idea about how painful that disease was regarding all these intrusive thoughts. If you think about people who suffer through PTSD, the description is these thoughts keep coming back I used to call it a slide tray. All the young firefighters laugh and go, what the hell is a slide tray? Okay, so it's in your hard drive, but it keeps coming back and you can't get rid of it. And that's what was happening to him with the OCD, was he would continue to have these obtrusive thoughts. So now, and here's the other thing to remember about people with mental health challenges, because sometimes they get pegged as, well, they're not as smart as everybody else. Really? So he, through all of his troubles and everything, was a B+ student. He was the catcher on the baseball team. He played nose guard and middle linebacker. He had a great sense of humor. He was, in my mind, of my 3 boys, the one that was pegged to be a firefighter. He had a heart of a giant. Now we're getting ready to go to high school. He's graduated with good grades, but all these struggles. And right before he's supposed to start high school, literally standing on our driveway, he said, I can't do this. And I was like, no, Sean, it's okay. High school is intimidating, but your brothers will be there. It's all right. And again, my wife was listening better than me. She goes, be quiet. She goes, Sean, what do you mean you can't do this? I said, I don't want to live anymore. Now I'm standing in the driveway going, this isn't in the parents' handbook, but it is in the fire chief's handbook, and it is with the guy's cape's handbook. So I thought, okay, I'm going to use my fire chief cape on him. So I said, Sean, you realize what I do for a living. And when I was on the ambulance, if somebody told me that, I would have no choice, but we would take them to the hospital. And when they go in the hospital, they put them in the hospital, and then they lock the door behind them. And he looked right at me and he said, yeah, I know. Let's go. I walked around the car and got in. And I remember looking through the windshield and going, okay, what do you do now, Mr. Super Fire Chief? So we got in the car and we drove to the hospital. Now, I had made this trip so many times on the ambulance. It always seemed like somebody had a panic attack at 2 a.m. It was never at noon. It presented as a cardiac. It turned out that it was nothing. We would put them on this cot, take them to the hospital, and you stood in front of this bank of 4 white elevators. Then you go up to the 4th floor. They would get off the cot. They disappear into a room, change into their gown, come out of there, and then go behind a door, but with all these other losers, and the door would be locked. Now I'm standing in front of that same bank of elevators, except this time I've got my son next to me and my wife on his other side. And up we go the 4 floors, and out we go. He changes his clothes. They give us the bag of his belongings, and he disappears behind that door. Except this time there was one thing that was very, very different. There weren't losers on the other side of that door. But Sean was not a loser. All of a sudden, it was as if this fog cleared and I could see, and these were mothers and fathers, doctors, electricians, first responders who were in there, and they were ill just like everybody else in the other floors in this hospital. The difference was their door was locked because there was a stigma about be careful about these people. Yet they were just as ill, if not more so, than some of the other people in that building. In my ride home, I was sick to my stomach, and I wasn't sick to my stomach because our 14-year-old was now in the cycle. I was sick to my stomach because I thought of every single ambulance call I went on, that I was pissed at that person that we took to the hospital, that we did nothing for it, that cape was useless, and I judged them. Now I'm getting a little bit of a peek behind the curtain and going, no, they're just ill like everybody else. So we went through high school, and it was an incredible roller coaster ride. A number of suicide attempts, all sorts of different trials with medications and with interventions, and nothing got any better. At one point, we got a second mortgage on the house because we were getting financially depleted. Insurance wasn't covering hardly anything, and took him to Mayo Clinic for a week. And at the end of that week, they told us, your son is terminal. And I hate to admit to you, there was a sense of joy in me, because it was like, okay, you found something. He's got a brain tumor, right? There's something we can do. And no, you don't get it, Pat. And we have 10 women who have breast cancer, same stage, same age, we give the same treatment to. 9 of them survive. 1 does not. We don't know why the 1 doesn't. All we know is that the disease does not respond to the treatment. We've been with Sean all week. We know he has tried literally every single medication that we know. He's tried every single intervention. And this mental health disease is not responding. And every day, and this haunts me, I remember it vividly, they said, every day he makes the choice to stay, not to take his life. He makes the choice to stay because that's how bad it is. And if we don't find something soon, and it is for his medication or for intervention, he's going to take his life. A long ride home from Rochester, Minnesota to Chicago, about a 6-hour drive. It felt like a 60-hour drive. But part of the conversation I had with him on that was, how do you feel? He said, Dad, they believed me. They listened to me and they believed me. I go, you can't stop. Don't quit. I go, we'll find a way. I'm back to, I'm reaching into that cape as far as I can reach back for it. Going, come on, you big hotshot fire chief. You save all these other people. You get all these freaking awards. There's got to be some way. This is your job. You raise your hand that you were going to protect everybody. Well, that certainly includes your kid. And when you took your vows, you said you would protect your wife. And if you were blessed enough to have kids, you would protect them. And I am not protected. I am failing at the most important thing in my entire life. Graduate high school, have a brief period of where it seems like it might be getting a little better. Tried to go to college part-time, tried a part-time job. Couldn't hold it. Disease was getting worse and worse. But finally, another suicide attempt. And after this one, I said, Sean, I go, it can't happen again. You got to look me in the eye and tell me you're not going to do this again. I can't have mom find you, or I can't have one of the boys find you. I go, I need to protect them too. And with big tears in his eyes, he looked me square in the eye and he said, I can't do that. Now, again, your parents' handbook, I got a kid who's dying. I got a kid who's terminally ill. And I have to tell him to leave. So we found a group home for him. And in group homes, if you're not aware, they have wonderful things. And they have a nurse on staff. They have somebody who gives him his medications. People there, it's like a family. They try and get a part-time job. They're doing post-high school education. He hated it. And I knew he did. But he went because he said, I can't promise. 3 months into that, we got a call that he was missing. And I'm like, how can you be missing from a group home? And they said, well, we're not a lockdown facility. Not long after that, we got a call from a local hospital. They said, we have your son here. He's been down. We don't know for how long. You need to get here right away. So we rushed to the hospital, and when we walked in, it was that look I'll never forget. And those of you who've been on the ambulance or been in ERs, you know it. He was on a ventilator. He was aspirating around the tube, and he was gray. And I'm like, oh my God, he's gone. And I walked up to the stretcher. Sorry, I get emotional during some of this. Walked up to the stretcher and I said, hey kid, time to go. You fought like hell. You have this body that's just not been good to you. And it's time to go, and it's okay. I'll take care of mom and I'll take care of the boys. I'm proud of you. You just need to go. And then they hand you the DNRs and the organ donation paperwork, and you're signing through tears on stuff and going, I cannot believe we're at this point with our youngest, our little boy. We took him up to ICU for our big family to come say goodbye to him. For 24 hours up there around the clock, people coming to say goodbye. His mom slept on one side of the bed. I slept on the other. You could feel him slipping away with how cold he was. And all of a sudden, the doctor came in the morning and said, I want you to tear up the DNR. And I'm like, why in the hell would I do that? I said, because he's trying, he's fighting to come back. Like, okay, give me the paperwork, ripped it up. And so tried to take him off the vent the next day, the next day, the next day, the next day. Finally, they said, we're going to try one more time tomorrow. If he doesn't come off the vent, then you'll have to find a place for him. And I'm like, well, what exactly are you talking about? Are you saying take him someplace in this vegetative state and just leave him there to die? Is that what you're talking about? Yeah, because he can't stay here in the hospital. Now, remember, I told you, very strong faith. That discussion I had with God that day was probably the most F-bombs I've ever dropped in my life. And I'm like, you can't do this to him. He got this defective body. He tried harder than anybody. We supported that. Now you're going to leave him like this? This is what you're going to do to his mom? She's going to have to watch that? I hope all of you think your mom is the best mom there's ever been, but I'm telling you, my wife would have tied with your mom for number one, because she was amazing. And I'm like, it's not fair. Well, the next day was St. Patrick's Day. I already told you I grew up in an Irish Catholic family. My 3 boys all struggled in math, but if it came to pouring a green beer on the keg on St. Patrick's Day, every one of them could pour the perfect head on that beer. It was a day of complete celebration for our family. Now it's D-Day, off the ventilator or not. So I went in, I decorated his room. And one of the nurses came in and said, well, what's all this about the decorations? I'm like, seriously, this should be a national holiday. What do you mean? What the hell is this about? It's St. Patrick's Day. So it comes time to take him off the ventilator. Big, strong guy with the cape, guy with the Class A uniform, the guy with all these plaques in his office, too scared to be in the room. So I literally stood out in the hallway. while my wife, the real hero, went in. And our niece, Sarah, just happened to show up. This poor kid showing up. She had the courage to go into that room because she didn't want to leave my wife alone. I didn't. Stood in the hallway, scared, wondering what I was going to do when he didn't come off the ventilator. And all of a sudden, I heard this cough. I thought it must be one of the nurses. Then I heard it again. And I literally, like a little kid, peeked around the corner. And there he was with his eyes open. And he was staring at me in the doorway. And all of a sudden, you got this big, beautiful, what I call my little boy, Sean, smile. And I had this hideous St. Patrick's Day tie. And I go, "Are you laughing at my tie?" And he shook his head. Well, the room already was crying. I then burst out, went running to him, almost knocked him out of the bed. He gave the best hugs even when he was so depressed, and squeezed him. And I'm like, "I'm not letting go of you for anything." They're like, "He's back. You need to go home and rest. We'll take care of him now." So we did. And this part of the story I didn't used to share. And I got really probably almost pushed into it by my wife to do it. And I'm glad I do now, because this is for at least one of you that's out there listening. So I got a call the next morning from the hospital. I saw it on caller ID and my heart dropped. I went, "Oh my God, I knew it. He died during the night," because he had had a collapsed lung and all sorts of other complications while he was in the coma. And I slowly pick up the phone. I go, "Hello." And there's this very raspy voice on the other end of the phone. He said, "Dad, are you coming to see me?" I'm like, "Oh my God, are you kidding me? Let's go." So we race down there. We get there. We walk in. And there he is sitting on the side of the bed. And he's very, very agitated. And he's trying to talk. And I'm like, "Sean, we're good, man. We're good. Just rest. We got plenty of time to talk now. You're back." My wife again, "Pat, just be quiet. Sean, what do you want to say?" I said, "Sean Kenny. I saw Sean Kenny." And I'm going, he knew it. Brain damage, oxygen deprivation, the drugs he took, but whatever. And she looked at me. And she looked back at him again and said, "No, you're Sean Kenny." He goes, "No, no, no, no. Looks just like Dad, but younger. Big hands." She goes, "Who looks just like Dad?" It was Grandpa Mike. "You saw Grandpa Mike?" "Yeah." He said, "We sat on this concrete bench with all these advertisements behind it." He said, "And he held my hand," and he said, "It's such big hands." My son then described my dad in his prime, in his mid to late 20s, when he was a great athlete, thick black curly hair. And my dad, I remember, because we took a bus everywhere when we were kids, he would walk and hold my hand going to the bus. And I always remember thinking his hands were so huge. And then we sat on these concrete benches while you waited for the bus, and the advertisements behind them were to pay for that bench. Now, Sean had never seen one of those benches. He had never heard me talk about it. He had never seen a picture of his grandfather except the guy who got carried out on the stretcher that day. And yet he described it in detail. My wife said, "Did he say anything else?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Tell Dad I'm so proud of him and I'm sorry I had to leave him so soon." Now, you can tell me anything you want about a kid who's been on drugs, now been drugged, now been down, about hallucinating. If you saw the tears in his eyes, they were the tears of a dad who only knew that feeling of like, I can't leave my kid behind, but I'm supposed to go. And she said, "Did he say anything else to you?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "Sean, it's too soon. You need to go back." Now, I'm just telling you, if you've lost anybody, especially around this Christmas season, we tend to think about people that we've lost. If you've lost anybody you've ever loved and you wonder if they are somewhere, I don't know where it is. I don't know what you call it. I certainly know you don't have to have a formal religion to get there. I'm telling you, they're there because my boy was there and he came back. And I had spent my entire life from the time I was 14 until that day, hoping my dad saw what I did. He never saw me graduate high school, college. He never saw me get married. Never saw me get on the fire department, get promoted. Never saw the day we had kids. And now all of a sudden my boy's going, "Yeah, Dad, he saw it. It's all good." So I'm like, this is the miracle we need. We're good. We're good going forward. I don't know what. And God, by the way, that conversation I had with you with all those F-bombs, I was only kidding. Forget it. But blow that away. You're awesome. Thanks a lot for what you did. So now we go forward. No better, worse. About a month later, he's now hearing deficiency really bad from being down. The depression is coming back in a huge wave. He was one of the only person who was trying a pilot thing where they literally put an implant in his chest to help block some of those chemical impulses that go to the nerves in the brain. It just made him worse. And so on the 3rd of June, he died by suicide. People always say to me, are you angry at him? I'm like, Are you kidding me? You talk about resiliency. I watched that kid fight for 15 years, 15 years, where he never, ever gave up in the most horrific circumstances you could be in, locked in hospitals, locked in a state institution. He just kept trying until he got to a point where he was in that narrow black corridor, the same narrow black corridor I was in, the same narrow black corridor for people that you know who have died by suicide, where there's only one way out, one piece of hope, and that's that light at the end of the doorway. And you say, well, that's a really sad story. I wouldn't be doing this. And I always say, I found a piece of paper after John died that said, when he grew up, he was 10 and a half years old. When I grow up, I want to be a fireman. I never got to pin that badge on him. But I'll tell you what, that kid has saved more lives in the last 12 years when I've been out talking and touched more people than I have in my 40 years in the fire service. His mission in life was to teach me this, to come forward and bring it forward. So I went out on the circuit and I started teaching and tried to get that message. Mental illness is a physical illness. Don't judge people. Help them, love them, support them. It's no different than a back injury. And I'm doing well. I'm 75% of the audience. I can see the light bulb go on. 25%, not so much. They're crying because of the story, but they're not really, they're putting a cape on to save me. So my wife said, let's put a slide in with a physical comparison. Maybe that'll work. So we did. We put mental health up against brain cancer. Okay, how do you find it? Are you more prone to it? How's it diagnosed? And then finally, when it's terminal, how are people treated? Well, the person with the cancer is treated as a hero, gets a hero send-off. Person dies by suicide is judged, and there's a stigma, and family are even many times avoided. They're not embraced as we do when someone passes from cancer. I was going to retire in May of 17. I was turning 60. We were going to go to the oldest pub in Ireland, which ironically is called Sean's Pub in this little town of Athlone. My wife didn't want to go back because we had taken Sean there in 2003 for a vacation. He had a great time. She said, I'm not going back without him. I go, here's the deal. I go, I didn't even know the oldest pub was Sean's Pub. I go, we'll be sitting in there. We'll make a phone call. I'll call work and go, I'm retiring. I go, he'll be part of it. She was like, okay, you're on. Well, in January of 16, she actually New Year's Eve of 15, she missed the table with a bottle and everybody's like, I'll cut her off. She had too much to drink. And on the way home, she said to me, Pat, I'm not drunk. I go, I know you're not. It was just an accident. She goes, no, I missed the table. I know, it's no big deal. She goes, no, it's a big deal. Well, 2 weeks later, she was diagnosed with glioblastoma. She had 9 inoperable tumors in her brain. And when I got the phone call about the diagnosis and I'm sitting on the bed next to her sobbing, I'm like, did we know? Why did we pick that disease? Why? Not fair. So for 11 months, I watched her fight the same way her boy did. Except this was very different. I had never told anybody in the firehouse about Sean's battles because I didn't want him to be judged. I knew the stigma. I didn't want him to walk in and they go, there's a kid who tried to kill himself. There's a kid who's been in the hospital. I cut my people short. I didn't have enough faith in them because they would have come through. It would have come through for me, more importantly, for my wife, my brothers, and for Sean. This time was different. This time everybody knew. And the response was amazing. Everything she had paid forward was paid back to her in spades. And she got a hero's send-off. But the day before she was supposed to go, or actually 2 weeks before she was supposed to go, we had a middle son who was getting married on November the 12th. So he came in with my daughter-in-law 13 days before, and he said, Mom, you got 13 days left. At this point, she's paralyzed on the left side, bedridden. She's like, I didn't fight this hard to miss this wedding, so I'll be there. Next day I went for a run. I came back in and I could tell something was up, and the lady who was staying with him, who happened to be Sean's godmother, said, there's been a change. I go, why didn't you call me? She said, no, she's okay. Go in and talk to her. So I did. But what's going on? So I'm not going to make the wedding. Whoa, we just told the kids last night we were going to make it. What happened? She said, I saw Sean. I go, where did you see Sean? She said, at the corner of the bed. And ladies and gentlemen, if you could have seen the look on her face, I've seen that look of determination over 37 years with her. It was right there. I said, did he talk to you? And she said, yeah. So what did he say to you? He said, Mom, I'm coming to get you. So 5 days later, she passed away at 3:43 in the morning. She fought like hell all night long. And I kept saying, come on, just go. He's right there. He's waiting for you, pull you across. Just go. We got this. The wedding will be fine. We're okay. Wouldn't go. She wouldn't go. And then around 3:00, she got peaceful. And at 3:43, when she died, and the hospice number, our hospice nurse rather said that number, I go, did you say 3:43? And she said, yeah, why? Does that number mean something to you? And I go, how many firefighters died on 9/11? Like, oh my goodness. And I go, yeah, well, there's my sign. You go, she's okay. She knows I know what that would mean. And she's all right. So now, the day before she went into that coma, she decided that she was going to lay on me the most powerful Irish Catholic guilt trip you could. And she said to me, I want you to do me a favor. And she made me promise 5 things, one of which was, I want you to write a book. I go, I can't write a Christmas card. Wait, what are you talking about? She goes, I want you to write a book. I want you to write the book about Sean's story. You can't do all these talks. You don't hit that many people. It's too hard emotionally. Write the book. Let more people know so they know who Sean is, and they know about mental illness, and it's a physical illness, and they know about courage, and they know about hope. How many people, when they get treatment and care, go on to live amazing lives? But you got to do it in a book. So I tried to go in the back door. I went, okay, I promise I'll try. Not after 35 years of marriage. No, you won't try. You'll do it. I said, okay. So finally last year, it came out, and that's the book that PJ talked about in the beginning. So that's my journey. Is it any different than any of yours? No. No one journey is more difficult than any others. And there's loads of other people, if they told you their stories, mine would pale in comparison. The one thing I took away from it that was important to me was there is a plan and there's a purpose. I don't understand it a lot of times. Obviously, in these two circumstances, I don't like it. There's going to be 2 empty chairs at our table for Christmas. They're going to be sitting there, but I won't get to see them. And I haven't got to share many of those experiences with them. But I believe I will someday. And when people say, how do you keep going? If it wasn't for my faith, I would be back in that same dark tunnel. And I'm not so sure I wouldn't be doing the same thing. So I'm no hero. I just didn't want Sean and Eileen to die in vain. I wanted their mission to be shared. And so that's why I do what I do. And that's why Peter and PJ, I so appreciate having the forum. Poor PJ's like, could you talk for a little bit? And I've almost monopolized the whole damn hour. So, okay, I'm done now. I'm going to take a sip of something to drink.
Chief, it's, like we spoke about in Portland, your story is amazing. I don't think Frank will ever let me schedule another show, especially close to being Christmas. It's supposed to be this happy time again after hearing your story. But what I look at is, now that I've heard it more than once, is what's behind this, right? So you're a guy who's, you've a career-ending athletic injury. You lost your father. You sat at his grave contemplating suicide, hoping for death. You've lost your son. You've lost your wife, but yet you still get up every day. There are first responders, as brother and sisters that are out there right now that are listening to this show, or they're working a shift, or they're sitting in a corner at home that they're struggling. And we want them to know, and I want them to know that it's okay. It's okay to struggle, but you have to get some help. You have to reach out to those avenues that we all have, whether it's peer support, somebody you work with, an anonymous 1-800 number. It's your local hospital, your emergency room, your local fire department, a department who you don't even know anybody. Knock on the door. There are plenty of ways for us to get help. And unfortunately, sometimes we need to hear a story like yours. Myself and Frank, we've both had our challenges. We've both lost our father. I lost my father at a very young age. Frank lost his father a couple years ago. My wife, luckily, and I felt bad saying to you, but you were so graceful. My wife was 2 years ago diagnosed with cancer. We went through a very difficult year and a half. But thank goodness I get to go home to her today because she's still alive. She survived. Right. And we all have these challenges in our life, and we all have, maybe something not like you went through. It could be just a call. It could be an EMS call. It could be a fatal fire today, or it could be just that call that hits us wrong. And our brothers and sisters out there have to know today that there's help, and there's people that have been through less. There's people that have been through worse, but it's possible to be resilient in these times. It's possible to go through what you went through and to come out on the other side and still do so good. You make an impact every day to firefighters and first responders across this country. And you have a lot to be proud of with your family, but also what you continue to do in the message that you share.
I think you hit on something, PJ, that's so true. And for those people who are out there who are struggling, we get into this vocation, everybody tells us you have to be brave, and you do. So my challenge to you is you just have to expand the definition of bravery. And being brave means making that phone call, knocking on that door, telling somebody that you're struggling, because it doesn't show that there's something less about you than anybody else. You get a little bit of a rip in your cape, and we all get rips in our cape. And there are loads of people who will help repair that. And when it's repaired, just like a broken bone, many times it's stronger than when it got ripped. You can do that, and nobody will judge you. They will absolutely reach out to you and they will help you. So that is that process of saying bravery means I'm going to actually say, is there something I can do for you? So a tip I always say when I do the presentation is don't ask somebody if you're okay. Are you okay? Because every fire service member across the country, regardless of where you're at, or across the world, regardless of what language you speak, if you ask a firefighter, are you okay? They go, yeah, good, I got it. Don't. If your little voice, that voice I told you, says they look like they're struggling, they ask them, is there anything I can do for you? Maybe there's not. And maybe they just had a quarrel with somebody and it's not really that big of a deal. But they might have just found out that their dad has terminal cancer and they just need to talk. And it's been clinically proven. That's where peer support really came from. That just by talking, you don't have to be a trained professional, or just by talking, it helps you reduce that stress level. It helps you reduce those chemicals in your body that work towards that depression and anxiety. And it's a brave thing to do. And it's something to be proud of. And you will then rebound, because we are all born resilient. You don't come out of the womb and all of a sudden you're afraid of everything and you don't have any resiliency. We have that quality, every single one of us, you too. It's just a matter of exercising it like anything else. And the only way you can do it is to realize sometimes you don't wear the cape and you just need somebody to carry it for you or to wear it for a little while you repair and you put it back on and you go back to what you're doing.
Chief, I think you have such an important message, and the fact that we all have to keep going is just so powerful. PJ is right. I'm never having him book the holiday show ever again. But no, your message is powerful, and I want to take it to the other side just for a second, because I think it
Sure.
at least has to be said, because I've seen it throughout my career. And as in with anything in the fire service and in society, it's almost like the pendulum of injustice. Sometimes we start off here, and then instead of bringing it where it should be, where mental health isn't stigmatized and we're reaching out and taking care of each other, sometimes the pendulum goes too far over here.
Right.
And I think that, not to be insensitive, but I think that especially recruit and new firefighters need to hear that, yes, it is okay to ask for help, and we need to take care of each other. And nobody can keep the cape on at all times, and we need to be resilient. However, where that resiliency really comes into play is if you're on the scene of an emergency and you're called there to be the one with the cape on, you can take it off after you get back to the firehouse.
Right.
You can't take it off on the call. And I hate to be the one to say it, but it needs to be said. When I lived in a firehouse in Montgomery County, Maryland, when I was going to college, we pulled a child, I still remember his name, Chucky, out of the pool. And one of the EMTs, instead of performing, threw up on scene and complicated the rescue. You can't make excuse for that. You have to realize that as horrible as whatever we're dealing with it, you have to push through, be resilient. And then afterwards, we need to take care of each other for the horrific things. There was a recent line of duty death with a rescue with a firefighter where somebody who was supposed to be helping with the rescue stayed on a ladder and cried while somebody else had to push him out of the way to get in and remove a firefighter that lived. Things like this happen. So when we have these powerful conversations, and I think they need to be had, and your story needs to be told, and so many different aspects of it, even what you said about being on that other side of the door with the stigmatism. I think every EMT, firefighter, and medic needs to hear that, because we need to treat people better than we do. And I think that was a real honest moment. But when you're on scene, you got to wear that cape for 15 minutes.
Right.
It's only 15 minutes. So mental health is real, should not be stigmatized. We need to take care of each other, but you have to be able to perform on scene. And as we talk about mental health, no one ever mentions that part of it. I've never heard anybody say, hey, you got to get by 15 minutes and then it's completely okay. And we need to go above and beyond. And there's nothing wrong with having those feelings and emotions. And another thing that the fire service doesn't talk about is, how do you reconcile those feelings when you actually make that impact and save somebody at a fire, but somebody else dies at that same fire? Really different things that people experience that nobody really prepares them for. We don't talk about that in the academy, because all it is it's about making the save. But what happens on the day you make the save is the day that someone else perishes in that fire. And that's something that we should think about, where I'm all for like the photographs in front of the fires and that camaraderie, but that has no place at a fatality. You gotta realize that we're always in everybody's eye. And I hate to kind of say this to be viewed negative, because I don't think anything that you said was negative, but I think that point has to be said. And I just like your input on both of those things, especially because you're so well respected. And it's an honor to have you on the show, even though PJ will never book Christmas again.
Well, and I will finish with a positive Christmas story, because I do think Christmas is the time that we really do need to be up. And I think if people really put their arms around this, they can help so many people, that there's your best gift you could give to anybody. But I am 100% behind you. And PJ will tell you, it's in my presentation. I always talk about, why don't we, when we do orientations, before anybody ever fills out an application, we might tell them that, you know what, you probably in your career, if you do this, you're going to experience a back injury. We can teach you all we want about here's the proper way to lift, but the first time somebody in full arrest between the commode and the tub, you're not going to pull them properly. You're going to get them out there and you're going to try and save their life. But we don't tell them that we're going to expose them to the worst stuff that they're ever going to see. And it is going to bother it, because we only hire people who care. Then we expose them to shitty situations. And when it bothers them, we're shocked. Of course it's going to bother you. So you're not all cut out for this profession. If I was a tax consultant, most people would be in jail for tax evasion. I'm terrible. So you should be able to go no before I hand you the cape. Because once I hand you the cape and you come through that academy door, you're not giving it back. Even if you know you should, you're not. And now all of a sudden you are in that horrific situations you just gave examples of, Frank, and people freeze, because that's not where they should be. And we don't give them a chance to do that. So I 100% agree. And you should tell people now, you've been given this gift and this vocation. So that means in the worst times, it's all about that person over there. We got to keep going until that person or persons over there have been taken care of to the best of our ability, whether they're fatal or whether we save. That's what we took an oath, and that's what we're going to do. And that's part of bravery. When you come back, then if it bothers you 3 weeks, 3 months, 3 years later, the bravery continues to go, now I need to talk about it. I'm with you 100%.
You know, and the only thing I'll add to that, and yes, I'll admit it, is as a 25-year paramedic, there was plenty of calls that I went to where you're taking care of the family sometimes. We may be going through efforts of taking care and treating a patient for the sake of the family. So while both of you mentioned, you know, taking care of that person, taking care of that situation, we can't lose sight of there's always more than one patient. The patient's the one that's in front of you, but there's always other people there that we have to take care of. And sometimes going through the motions and doing the right thing is taking care of them. And when we turn off the monitor, we turn off the equipment, we then have to turn our focus to the family and their mental health. So it's not just about, you know, doing the CPR or stopping the bleeding or saying, hey, there's nothing that we can do here. We have to make sure that we step up and we take care of the family, and they come before us. You know, we're not talking safety. This isn't a scene safety issue. So we need to put the patient's family before us, whether it's a fire, motor vehicle accident, an EMS alarm. And that's something very, very important. And Frank, I couldn't agree with you more. And Chief, I couldn't agree with you more as well. And we have to step up, regardless of how hard that call is, that situation is. That's our obligation. That's not the obligation. That's why we were hired. That's why what we were sworn to do is to take care of the people in our community, regardless of the situation.
Right. I was always amazed. The most incredible letters I ever got as a chief were from surviving spouses after we had worked either a child or a parent, and they said, please thank your guys for all they did for us. And I would always make sure everybody in the crew got a copy of it, because I said, see, you measured the outcome in that individual's in heaven. We're measuring the outcome in these people feel like they were loved and cared about. So you really did make a difference that day. It was just defined differently. I'm really glad you brought that up.
Chief, I got to turn it back over to Frank, but yes, Frank, I agree. This is a sad topic and not probably the greatest uplifting stories on the Christmas week. However,
no, but it's powerful because not everybody's having a great Christmas, and what do you call it? And you can ask for help anytime, and people are there, and it shouldn't be just at Christmas time. So I think I said that in jest, but what do you call it? It's sad. I mean, there's no way about it, but it's adversity that makes us who we are. And Chief, you telling your story, I guarantee has saved people and made it okay for people to ask for help. And I think that that's powerful and warranted. And I think that I think PJ is 100% right about you have more than one patient talking to the family. One thing, when I was a company officer, I'd always encourage my crew to talk to the family. We weren't on an ambulance, we're on an engine or truck, but talk to the family after they leave. Too many firefighters out there think that they work for the FBI and they can't interact with the public. You can't talk about somebody's medical history or what you did medically, and you can't talk about cause and origin. Besides that, have a conversation. Everybody wants to talk to you. You're a fireman and a firefighter, and you'll leave that lasting impression on people, even when things go bad. You be a little bit sensitive, but have that conversation. I mean, play with the kids, put the kid on the fire truck. That goes a long way. They don't want to see you just show up and leave. Let the cops do that. Firefighters should be engaged in the community. We're at the witching hour, and Pat, thank you so much for coming on today. And your message is unbelievable. If somebody wants to get a copy of your book, how do they get a copy of it?
They can get it's available on Amazon. They can just go right there, and I really appreciate that. I told PJ we just sent the audio version of it to Audible last week, so hopefully that'll be out sometime in the first part of the year, because I know a lot of people don't like reading hard copies, so they like to listen to it. They'll have to listen to me, so I pre-warn you about that they asked me to do it, and I'll never do that again. And here's my final Christmas message, because I don't want to miss it. So when people always say to me, they go, so how do you get through Christmas? I always say it's one of my favorite holidays, because I said, if Christmas doesn't happen, I don't get to see my boy again. And so that's my positive. So if you want a smile on your face and you're missing somebody, they miss you too. You'll see them pretty soon. And what you guys are doing, this is powerful to all your messages, regardless today's mental health, whether it's tactics or politics or whatever it is. That discussion with our fellow firefighters, we can't lose that, because it's the greatest gift we got. So thank you to both for having me, and Merry Christmas to you and your families, and God bless all of you, and be safe out there, folks.
Chief, if you send me the link, I'll send it to Peter, and we'll put the link for the Amazon thing on the show. So if somebody wants to get a copy of the book, they can grab it. Peter, PJ, and I just want to thank you for a great year and all you do. You can click back on if you comb your hair, Peter. We could see you. There he is.
Can't do it without you, Peter.
The man behind the curtain. We, PJ and I just want to thank you. You're always there for everybody at Fire Engineering. Peter's like the pump operator at a fire. Nobody appreciates the person. Nobody pays any mind to him. But when things go wrong, everybody looks towards him. So, Peter, from my family to your family, we really appreciate everything you do for our show, everybody's show, Fire Engineering, and the fire service. You're unsung hero of you're more important than PJ and I, because without you, no message ever gets out. So thank you so much.
Let's not get crazy, but thank you. Thank you, guys.
I'm telling you. PJ, you have any words to take us off?
Well, Merry Christmas, and thanks everybody. And Peter, thank you. And Pat, thank you. Thank you for being the most resilient person I've ever listened to, because without your resiliency, we would be losing more firefighters, more first responders every year. So Merry Christmas to you and your family, and thank you for what you do.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Everybody have a Merry Christmas.